This episode is brought to you by Meow Wolf. Because Danceportation returns to Meow Wolf Denver on Saturday, June 1st, with a takeover by Jay Wara. And they've got even more killer DJs to announce soon. Don't miss this rare cosmic dance party pulsing through all 4 floors of Convergence Station. You know, when I was tripping out about reading this, Paul, it was like, there are 4 floors. It feels like there's like 10. Tickets are on sale now. Visit meowwolf.org to get yours. That's meowwolf.org. Floors are not a concept that I have once I step inside Meow Wolf. Today on CityCast Denver, is Colorado really the 3rd most dangerous state in the country? Depends on which news outlet you ask. Plus, the city of Denver says illegal hot dog sales are on the rise. So me and Westward editor Patty Calhoun dig into the crime data and the street dog drama and more stories that mattered this week. Today is Tuesday, May 21st. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Patty Calhoun, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thanks so much.
There's a lot happening over the last couple of days. The Avs lost, the Nuggets lost, but also the encampments came down in Auraria. You and I were just talking. We can't figure out what was the catalyst or...
On Friday, I was really thinking that maybe Auraria had just decided with the Nuggets coming in on Sunday, home game at Ball Arena, potentially big party, but you know, that they would need that area, that they just swept it. But there's no evidence there was any kind of sweep. It really looks like the group that were camping, they just decided to disperse. They've said they're doing more around the campus, art pieces, but I can't figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of poked through Instagram a little bit. I looked at the Students for a Democratic Society, which was one of the organizers of the encampment, and they posted a statement, but there's no direct information about what led to the dismantling, if it was a choice, if it was an agreement that they had made with the campus leaders, if it was something more by force. I couldn't figure it out. And
it was after Auraria had announced they were pretty much locking down, that they were going to remote classes. So it's really strange. And we will, I'm sure, learn more as the week goes on. But
that's kind of what I was thinking, too. That's a good point. So on Friday, before the encampment dismantling, or at least the announcement of it, was this announcement that CU, Denver had canceled classes, or at least moved everything online. That's right. And then the rest of the schools sort of followed. And then the dismantling conversation started happening. So I wonder if they were connected. I guess you're right. We'll just keep digging to find out. But I checked every news outlet. I did not see anyone post a why.
And I did hear that Spear was pretty much blocked as people were moving out on Friday. But I didn't hear much about that.
So, I didn't either. So
and then, of course, the Nuggets lost, and and the Avs lost. So we're not going to be having parties there. They're just going to resod.
I'm still just going to be depressed about that for the next week. All right. Well, let's get to our first story, which is about crime, our favorite thing to talk about in Denver, which is hysteria over crime stats. But according to a new report from U.S. News and World Report, Colorado made it to number 3 on their 10 most dangerous states in America list, underneath Louisiana at number 2 and New Mexico at number 1. Patty, what do you think about this number? We'll get into where it comes from in a minute, but.
Well, I think the number doesn't hold up if you really parse the figures. And that's the big issue here. When you talk about where it comes from, U.S. News and World Report sounds a little more significant than Lawn Sweeper USA or all the other listicle releases we get all the time. I mean, I get 10 of those a day probably. And this one is from U.S. News, but U.S. News got in a lot of trouble a couple of years ago over their college rankings. Do you remember? And a lot of universities said, we're no longer participating. So U.S. News and World Report doesn't have the cachet it used to. And part of it is the stats they use. And if you dive into this, they're looking at 2022 stats. So not only is Colorado ranking that high because of property crime and only property crime.
That was the thing that pushed us up to this number
high.
3.
And in 2022, there's no question we had a lot of property crime. We had thefts, carjacking, car thefts were the highest in the country, but they've been down for the last 2 years. So these numbers just don't hold up. But the narrative is going to continue.
Yeah.
You can see people picking it up around the country. Third most dangerous. It's like we would walk out of the Lindy Zimmer studio and be shot, when in fact, we walk in this neighborhood all the time, and there's no problem.
I have to say that too. I mean, I live in a neighborhood that has higher instances of gun violence than other neighborhoods, definitely across the city. And I still don't feel unsafe in my neighborhood. And I agree with you, because the ranking was based on pulling violent and property crime stats, like you said, from 2022 from the FBI database. And it said the violent crime rate here was 492 per 100,000 people. And then property crime was 3,148 cases per 100,000 people, which made us the second highest in the country for that. And I think Polis addressed that 2022 stat and said, we've done a lot of work since then. I'm even thinking about, we had the gentleman on to talk about car thefts going down because of just being more proactive, especially like places like DIA, where we were seeing them more patrols, just encouraging people to use a club, really basic stuff.
Denver really launched a campaign and has knocked it way down. But last year, Polis also did. And this is not new that he says we want to be one of the 10 safest states. He started that last year. He repeated it last week when he had a press conference about bill signings that weren't as significant, because most of the significant crime legislation was in 2023.
It was already done. So, yeah. And I mean, interestingly, if it was any consolation to anyone, Colorado ranked as having the 4th best economy and the 5th best education in the U.S. So with these kinds of things, it's like, data is so up to interpretation. What data you choose to pull, what you choose to put it up against, can really determine more. If you look more into that, like you're saying too, it's just like, this doesn't quite jive with what we're experiencing.
It does upset you when you realize this is what people are going to hear, because they're going to hear number one in whatever. And really, the stats are bad. Lots of legal groups send out, and not legal groups, law firms send out stats that have nothing to do with them, but they think they might get them clients. So you really have to take this with a grain of salt, even if you hear about it. Now, but the city is also working with the Office of Neighborhood Safety, which was announced same time last week.
What did you think about that? I have to say, I was a little bit about it, because I feel like Johnson's administration likes to create offices. We've seen a lot of those.
Yeah, and this is under the Office of Equity, which was created by Hancock, also relatively new. I do think it's a smart move if it's handled right and doesn't just become a bureaucratic nightmare.
Right.
I mean, it's certainly something that during the mayoral race came up. Several different candidates were pushing it. Then when Johnston didn't initiate it right away, a citizens group wanted to set up their own, which is a little trickier, because who has the oversight and what power do they have with the city?
Yeah.
Now the citizens can call the city to account if it doesn't work and it doesn't make them feel safer.
So it's kind of can be seen as just a mechanism for citizens to say, okay, we're watching.
Or just say, send out the star car.
Yeah.
Don't send the cops. Send people out. There's someone, I've seen it out a lot this week, people who are having trouble on the streets, but they really don't require a cop presence.
Well, and that people having trouble on the streets, good point to look at, because I'm thinking about what this kind of thing is fuel for. This kind of information is fuel for a thing like Do Better Denver. People that are exacerbating the, or at least like, I don't know, falsely equating people experiencing mental health struggles and drug issues on the street with crime, which those are not the same. They're not always the same thing. Of course, there's going to be overlap. But sometimes to me, these kinds of studies and this kind of data interpreted this way gives these groups fuel that we don't doesn't help us in any way.
Right. And they're not the ones going around downtown. I know you go downtown. I go downtown every day. And I feel it is no less safe than it has been for the last 20 years.
No. I mean, honestly not. I mean, I feel like I remember times 20 years ago that felt a little bit more shady, especially at night, than they do now. Not to undermine folks' experiences. I know some folks feel very unsafe in their neighborhoods, but I worry that this kind of headline does more damage than what the reality is.
Right. And what I also hope, there is no question that 911 calls, the response time has gone down for some of them.
Yeah.
So maybe this Office of Neighborhood Safety will make them more responsive to the right kind of calls. Maybe they'll be able to distinguish what is a true emergency that requires the police and what can be handled
with
by a neighborhood office.
Oh, yeah, or by a neighborhood office, or the co-responder program, or the STAR program, or something else. And I think, again, the 2022 data we'll look at that again in a couple years and see the work that's been done in the last 2 years might have an impact on how we rank, I guess, in one of these
Right. So
things
it's
in the
both
future.
old data and the kind of data. I just don't think people think physical violence to themselves differently than they think of property violence. I hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And very different things. And we, again, the numbers there were very different. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're talking illegal hot dogs. This episode is brought to you by Pine Melon, the farmer's market delivered. Pine Melon is a next-generation grocery delivery app that partners with over 200 farmers, ranchers, and producers in Colorado to help make fresh, locally sourced foods available to the Denver community at fair prices. Get high-quality meats, eggs, and dairy from small local farms, fresh baked breads from local bakeries, and more, as well as all of your favorite pantry staples. Best part is, Pine Melon offers same-day delivery to Denver and soon Boulder within a 2-hour window, no subscription necessary. Save time in your busy schedule and get fresh and healthy groceries delivered right to your door. Join the movement and support local today. Use promo code CityCastDenver for $75 off your first delivery at pinemelon.com. That's pinemelon.com. And we're back. So Westward's own Katie Cheshire has been on the hot dog vendor beat ever since this dude was picked up outside Ballerina a couple weeks ago for selling hot dogs without a permit. Katie reported that illegal hot dog sales are on the rise. Patty, to the best of your knowledge, have you ever eaten an illegal hot dog?
Not to my knowledge. I've eaten plenty of bad hot dogs, and that is one of the issues why they're cutting down on illegal hot dogs, because hot dogs would seem almost impervious to any issues, health issues, but that is not the case. You can actually get bad hot dogs. And if people aren't holding to the health standards, you could be putting yourself in danger. So we understand that this is not just greed, like go eat your hot dog at Ballerina. There are health issues. And the other thing is there really are rules. Like peddlers are supposed to move every, few hours, even if they have a license. And the guy who was arrested hadn't moved, except when the cops came over, he ran away. So that is why he went to jail.
So there's like a little bit of regulation, and it is pretty minimal, I would say. The permitting process is not super expensive. It's just like you said, making sure that they're moving, making sure that they're following probably a minimum standard of health code stuff. Like when we're talking about, it's not like a full restaurant, but you're still eating food from them.
The temperature you're keeping the food at, things like that.
And so that I want to read this. It's kind of a funny quote from our guy, Eric Escudero at the Denver Department of Excise and Licenses. He said, unfortunately, with the dangerous lack of sanitary standards being practiced by some of the unlicensed hot dog carts, people may find themselves sick the next day and assume it was because of the alcohol they consumed the previous night, instead of the hot dog and bacon sitting unrefrigerated for hours, which is
yummy.
Exactly what you were just talking about. But I guess in this, we're just talking about crime and these issues that the city is addressing and the state is addressing. Where do you think the illegal hot dogs fall in the scope of things we need to be worried about?
I would say unless you're buying one, you don't need to be worried about them at all. And I don't think there's a lot of police presence chasing hot dogs. I mean, I think it's much more the city will send someone out from the health department if there's a problem. This one just had so many people watching, partly because it went viral on video.
And it was during like the Nugs playoffs. Like there was a lot more eyes, I think, on Ballerina than normal.
And then people get mad because they're like, what about my car being broken into in the parking lot? Why aren't they paying attention to that? Why are we paying attention to this one hot dog guy who indeed had run away? So I would argue there probably was more attention paid to it than there should have been. Maybe more police presence, but that is not really the focus of the DPD at the moment.
Yeah,
illegal hot dogs.
Well, and this guy, and I think the officer that picked him up was just, I think he was at the game. He wasn't like, someone was like, it was an undercover police officer. Like it wasn't, he just was in his regular clothes and he happened to
be there when there was a neighborhood inspection issue.
You've been in Denver for a long time, especially in LoDo during the development of Coors Field. And I would just say, to me, this is kind of a sign of us being a little bit of a bigger city these days. It's like, these are things you see in like the New Yorks and Chicagos and LA. Do you think that this is just a sign that Denver is just growing?
Well, it's also that it's replaced the people who used to be at the burritos with let out, because now you've got more trucks than you used to have. But You would have breakfast burritos delivered to offices all over downtown and at night by all the clubs. So that was pretty traditional, and they all were inspected sooner or later and often had to run away because they weren't licensed.
I wondered about that too, because I was like, I've definitely bought burritos from people. I've bought tamales from people. This doesn't seem like something outrageous to be happening, but I've also never gotten sick from one of those. So maybe that's
that you know of.
That I know of.
You could be blaming the water here at Westward. You never know.
So, I mean, again, the Avs just lost. The Nugs just lost. We're not going to have as much of that energy downtown maybe for the next couple of weeks, but we've still got a Rockies season that's full-fledged. Do you think this will continue to be something the city is paying attention to?
Illegal hot dogs, probably not. Although you've got a lot of big events coming up at Civic Center.
True.
So you've got the outdoor festival coming up. You've got concerts in the Civic Center. You've got a lot of things downtown where there might be people who are tempted to not become official vendors of those events, but be on the outskirts, take advantage of all the traffic. So you can see there will probably be some inspection of them. And again, I think it's great that people can get licenses, can have cottage industries, can go out and serve food that might be less expensive than you're going to get if you were going into an authorized facility. But you do want people to feel safe.
And that's sort of
safe from bad food.
Yeah, from bad, totally safe. That's our real issue here in Denver is you want to spotlight something, it's maybe bad food.
Yeah, who knows if U.S. News and World Reports gets a hold of this hot dog, we could be in trouble.
Yeah, I just have never had, I don't know. I've eaten many a hot dog. I've never worried about it. Well, I've eaten many a street dog.
Or those breakfast burritos that we never once asked for a license.
No. Well, I don't know. We'll keep watching. If you've had this experience, maybe you've gotten sick from a hot dog, or maybe you're one of these vendors and you want to tell a little bit more of your side of the story, give us a call, 720-500-5418. The Pushcart Hot Dog Hotline is open at 720-500-5418. When we come back, we've got a listener comment. All right, we are back. We always love to hear from you, our brilliant and hilarious listeners, about the things that you care about. So every Tuesday, we try to share a comment or answer one of your questions that comes through the CityCast Denver hotline. And this time we have a note. So last week, we talked to Jay Bouchard at 5280 Magazine about the state of the Stanley Hotel purchase, or I guess pending what's going on there. It's a little bit murky. Patty, you guys reported on that a little. I mean, I think Katie did a full cover story and that deal fell through essentially. Kind of.
It was confusing from the start, and we paid attention to the Stanley forever because how many great haunted hotels do you have commemorated in The Shining? So this most recent deal, the guy, Cullen, bought it, 8 years ago? And that he was heading into bankruptcy, he had problems, and this plan to sell it to an Arizona nonprofit was very confusing. And then a Colorado sort of nonprofit quasi-government agency was stepping in. And I know the reporter didn't get to stay in the meeting, so we're not entirely sure what happened. But it's very strange right now because I don't think Colorado does not want to be in the business of owning hotels.
And this is kind of the first of its kind for this, again, the quasi-governmental agency. It doesn't get tax money directly. It was a very complex thing. We'll put a link to the show notes. Jade describes it so accurately and helpful, but it will be a first of its kind for that kind of deal. If it happens. So we got a note from Joanna Cintron about the Stanley Film Festival. So Joanna is co-founder of Scene Latino. She worked at Denver Film for a long time, and she thought we didn't talk enough about the film aspects of this. And Jay and I talked a little bit about it, but let me just share her comment, and I think you could give us some background, Patty. So Joanna said, I was curious if you all have reached out to anyone involved with the original Stanley Film Festival. The first festival was in 2013 and was put on by some contractors from Denver Film. It then became obvious that the festival was a heavy lift and needed the infrastructure of a larger entity like Denver Film, and I was one of them at the time, so I worked on the festival in 2014 and 2015. She goes on to say after the 2015 festival, there was some drama about how much Denver Film would be paid to put on this event, and there were creative differences with John Cullen, who you mentioned, who's the owner, and the festival producers. She says, I'm simplifying it, but essentially the producers of the festival saw the potential of creating something a little more film focused, a place that could serve as sort of a summer camp for horror filmmakers, and a place for connections and inspiration. And John Cullen essentially wanted more of a horror convention, the spectacle, the fans, etc. And so she goes on to say there was some drama that followed, but her point was that The seeds for Stanley being a hub for filmmakers, film festivals, and the like had been planted more than a decade ago. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, that was such a different, almost a different Denver or different Colorado at that time in 2013.
Well, and it was certainly a different Stanley Hotel before Cullen came in. And you can see that he is definitely pushing towards the horror angle. I mean, he led the fight to bring Frozen Dead guys there.
Right,
and
Frozen
then
Dead
to
Guy Days,
actually
which
bring
moved
the
from
Frozen
Nederland.
Dead guy there. He's in a museum there. And that kind of makes sense with the whole thing he's going for. He were also brought in, and I can't remember right now, the horror movie company that is now in a partnership. So he's building other partnerships, but definitely something went on with the Denver Film Festival
That didn't.
that didn't work. And I think it could partly be distance. It could partly be him just wanting ownership of it and making it more year round than a one-time festival.
What I loved is she wanted to point out that although it was sort of short-lived, there were some big things that happened at this film festival. Taika Waititi premiered his mockumentary, What We Do in the Shadows, at the festival, and then went on to obviously become a huge director. And she said things like this are why festivals like this are so important and special to building a pipeline for major talent. And what I liked about her point was, like, again, I have this vision of, I remember a Denver of a different time when sort of no one was looking at us or no one was paying attention. So we had a lot of space to try stuff. And I think the Stanley Film Festival is one of those great examples of, we were trying things and it was starting to catch on, but maybe we were a little too early. Maybe the festival was just like too soon before we were ready to support something so massive. I don't know.
Well, and I think also it's when it's so tied to this landmark building that keeping the landmark building going is
a whole other issue.
Huge issue. So the festival almost becomes a side note as opposed to here where the film festival is it and spun into the film center. And you have a lot of different things that can go on year round that not 90 minutes away. So that's part of the challenge. But the Stanley is still involved. They're involved with Sundance now. So they're still doing some respectable film things. But this story has so many more chapters to come, I think.
It really does. And I really hope to Joanna's point that there's some looking back at that work to remember, or at least maybe pull some ideas and say, there were some really good things happening. We just maybe didn't have the infrastructure to make it the full-fledged festival that deserves to be happening at a Stanley hotel of 2030.
Or maybe they move it somewhere else. I mean, Telluride has a horror film festival now.
True.
Denver has another horror film festival. So there are other ways to get into it. Right now, it just might be a little messy at the Stanley.
Yeah. Well, and again, like you pointed out, I think the film festival that we have here in Denver started and then things grew out of that. And maybe it's just we're trying to figure out how to work it from the other direction. We'll see. I love that point. And also, I should just note, Joanna is also the partner of our CityCast newsletter editor, Adrienne Gonzalez, but she's obviously an avid listener of the show. And I've known Joanna for years. She's done incredible work throughout the city. And I appreciate this point, Joanna, that we need to pay more attention to things that happened before that maybe didn't seem to make as big a splash were actually the groundwork for the big stuff to come. Patty, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hey, before we go, I have a favor to ask. CityCast is doing our annual listener survey, and it would really help us out if you took it. You can take the survey at citycast.fm/survey. It'll only take about 7 minutes, and you're also eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card and some CityCast Denver swag. Even if you took it last year, we would be grateful if you took it again. You can take it now at citycast.fm/survey. That's citycast.fm/survey. Thanks. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell your favorite hot dog vendor about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See ya!